58 stops south of Tokyo on the Keikyu Line is Shioti Station in Yokosuka, Japan. Located in Kanagawa Prefecture, there are 100 reasons to visit Yokosuka. Known for its rich naval history, and also its very unique fashion. If you've ever seen Sukujan jackets, that's where those are from. It's a bastion of Japanese rock and roll, and you might even recognize Dobuita Street from the 1999 video game Shenmue. It's also the birthplace of the longest-serving Japanese Prime Minister, Junichiro Koizumi, who stars in his own manga called The Legend of Koizumi, where he battles against a reincarnated Fine. There's something else in Yokosuka. Tons of people from across Japan come to Yokosuka to pay their respects. Just a few minutes from Shioti Station is a tombstone. People leave everything from trinkets and flowers to cold hard cash, praying for good fortune. But despite all this, there's one huge problem. Whose grave is this? Ask anyone and they'll tell you he never actually existed, but I know for a fact, he's still alive. The journey that I took to find him was harrowing. I mean, I know we're going to be talking about a manga later, but when I say what I'm about to say, all of this pertains to real life. The road to learning who this guy is, what he's done, and why people pay respects to his grave was paved with backstabbing politics, assassination attempts declassified by the CIA, and the dethroning of God himself. And it all starts with the year he was born. 1941. On December 7th, 1941,
a date which will live in infamy,
Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. This signaled their surprise entry into a war with the United States of America, and this wasn't the first time in recent memory that Japan had been militaristic aggressors. In 1874, they invaded Taiwan. In 1894, you have the Russo-Japanese War, where they fought against Germany, and now you have World War II, and technically the Pacific War, because the fighting with the United States in the Pacific, like Iwo Jima, is considered its own war. Anyway, back then, Japan had what scholars call a warrior culture, and it changed dramatically over the course of 1850 to 1950, and it's all because of Yokosuka. Kinda. It's where the plot starts and ends, in a way. Let me explain. In 1853, Matthew Perry went to Japan. Okay, Commodore Matthew Perry, a United States naval officer who was in command of a whole bunch of ships, went to Japan in 1853 and is credited for ending Japan's isolationism. At the time, the ruling power in Japan was the Tokugawa shogunate, so a samurai warlord was in charge. The ruling class of Japan were the samurai. Perry sets up shop in a neat little port town, you guessed it, Yokosuka, and then, lo and behold, a few years later, you have the Boshin War in 1868, where the Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown by the imperial court and a Japanese alliance of clans that were backed by the United States. This is one of the most important moments in Japanese history. Why? This war brought about the Meiji Restoration, where, under the new system of government, samurai were effectively dismantled and sold for the worth of their parts, and samurai no longer had exclusive rights to bear arms. They had hereditary stipends, kind of like trust funds that got taken away, and the class system of Japan, where you were considered a high-class person if you were a samurai, and low-class scum otherwise, was abolished. While you had the literal samurai themselves being dismantled, the Meiji leaders very carefully preserved and transformed the samurai ideals to serve the new imperial state. What we think of as traditional Bushido, the strict code of conduct followed by the samurai warrior, wasn't actually a samurai thing. It was propaganda forged by the Meiji era government to give themselves legitimacy. 30 years after the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate, famous author Nitobe Inazo would publish his influential work, Bushido, the Soul of Japan. The Meiji government promoted Bushido not as historical accuracy, but as a unifying ideology to create national cohesion and military spirit. The warrior's willingness to die for honor and the concepts of absolute loyalty to your feudal lord would now all be entirely directed to the emperor. Previously a largely ceremonial figurehead, the emperor was transformed into this divine warrior king.
To the 70 million people of Japan, Hirohito, their emperor, is a god, through direct descent from the great sun goddess Amaterasu.
The Meiji Constitution itself declared the emperor sacred and inviolable, the supreme commander of the armed forces and the source of all political authority. Suddenly, the emperor had gone from a powerless position to God. In 1941, where our story begins, the emperor was a man named Hirohito. He would be posthumously honored as Emperor Showa, which is where we get the name for the Showa Era of Japan, which spans the course of his reign from December 25th, 1926 to January 7th, 1989. And before we go any further, this is what he looked like as a baby. By 1941, his militaristic thirst for imperial expansion and warfare were in full swing, and Japan's warrior culture reached its most extreme. Hirohito and his military government promoted the idea that Japan was uniquely suited for war because of its samurai heritage. The concept of death before dishonor became national policy. Japanese soldiers were taught that surrender was unthinkable, and they must fight to the death rather than face capture. These were warriors acting in service of their divine warrior god emperor, which gave them tremendous tenacity on the battlefield, but it was this co-opted Bushido warrior culture that would lead to Japan's existential crisis. You and I both know how World War II ended. We don't have to cover that. What's more important to the story is what happened directly after. In 1945, General MacArthur and the United States military would occupy a defeated and broken Japan, and what happened next would define Japan to this day because it's still around. The Constitution of Japan is the supreme law of Japan, written primarily by American officials during the occupation of Japan after World War II, so much so that it's often called the MacArthur Constitution. It gave people individual rights, and it kept the emperor as a symbol of the state, mainly because MacArthur thought the Japanese would rebel if they didn't have an emperor, but most importantly of all, it specifically declares Japan as a pacifist nation and renounces war entirely. Bushido, once called the soul of Japan, was no more. A warrior culture that was the burning crucible of Japan's war machine and national pride was shattered. But the final blow, the worst thing, was still yet to come. The final nail in the coffin, the Humanity Declaration. On January 1st, 1946, Emperor Hirohito made the declaration. The official translation reads, "The ties between us and our people have always stood upon mutual trust and affection. They do not depend on mere legends and myths. They are not predicated on the false conception that the emperor is divine, and that the Japanese people are superior to other races and fated to rule the world." The emperor was no longer divine. God was dead, and the warrior culture of Japan died alongside him. What can replace it? What can fill the void? What replaces an entire nation's culture? One of the darkest periods in Japanese history was about to begin. Wait, wasn't this video supposed to be about manga? Akagi is an unforgettable masterpiece, written and illustrated by Nobuyuki Fukumoto, famous for another one of his creations, Kaiji. In one of his earlier works, Ten, Akagi is an antagonist that faces off against Ten, the main character, in an intense battle of Mahjong. Akagi was so popular that when Fukumoto's publisher approached him with the opportunity to write a story dedicated to Akagi, there was almost no way to say no. The spin-off became a mainstream success, being printed in the serialized magazine Kindai Mahjong. The story follows Shigeru Akagi, a young man so gifted he's not only branded a genius, but a demon. His ability to read his opponents and stay calm under tremendous pressure make him a force to be reckoned with. Just like his first appearance, however, Akagi has an antagonistic side. He's often gambling in Mahjong to the extreme, putting himself or others at great risk, not wanting to stop until his opponents are completely decimated. This puts him in great contrast with Fukumoto's other famous protagonist, Kaiji, who is more of a standard everyday loser who happens to find himself in large-scale gambling situations, whereas Akagi lives for the thrill. He throws himself into it without any regard for himself, something that Fukumoto claims is the true spirit of a gambler. And it's this contrast between protagonists that fuels each respective series, with Fukumoto even saying in a 2020 interview, quote, "I named it Kaiji because I didn't want it to be cool. It's more of a refreshing image. However, Akagi Shigeru is cool because Akagi plus Shigeru makes him a great person, just like Yoshida plus Shigeru." Yoshida Shigeru. Come on, man, I was just starting to talk about the manga. Shigeru Yoshida was the Prime Minister of Japan during the post-war era. He worked closely with MacArthur and the United States in complying with occupation directives. In fact, it was effectively the Americans that put him into power. Originally, one of Yoshida's oldest friends, Ichiro Haruyama, was said to become the Prime Minister, but on the eve of his appointment, MacArthur stepped in and stole it out from under him. Yoshida, despite not even being a member of Haruyama's political party, was put in charge of it and made Prime Minister. So talk about stabbing your best friend in the back, man. Ouch. Yoshida was the Prime Minister that oversaw the adoption of the Constitution of Japan. He was then ousted by significant social unrest following labor disputes from impoverished workers, and when it looked like he might hold on, the threat of a general strike made General MacArthur tell him to step down. When his replacement dropped the ball harder than Times Square, Yoshida came back a year later. He then became famous for the Yoshida Doctrine, which is a term used to summarize his long list of policies and legislation aimed at hypercharging the broken post-war Japanese economy. And it worked. Eventually. The Japanese economy was suffering from rampant inflation, among other problems. To cut out 10 minutes of explaining economics, I will just say that the Americans, in something called the Dodge Line, made a plan to prescribe strict austerity measures on Japan that significantly cut public spending and government subsidies. Yoshida and his cabinet really didn't have much say in whether or not they could implement occupation policy, so even though they weren't on board with the plan, they had to implement it anyway. The Dodge Line was successful in countering hyperinflation, but the prescribed money shortage led to a deep recession, a wave of bankruptcies, increased unemployment, and mass layoffs that the country wouldn't recover from for years. This hardship, in fact, put a literal target on Yoshida's back. In 2005, the CIA declassified documents stating that an assassination plot was planned on Yoshida in 1952, with over 500,000 people in support of it. That plan never came to pass, and Yoshida resigned in December 1954 rather than face a vote of no confidence. In what I can only describe as the only justice in this part of the story, Yoshida was replaced by none other than the guy that got screwed over by MacArthur 7 years prior, his old friend Ichiro Haruyama. So good for you, Haruyama. But more to the point, 1955 marked the first year since the war ended that Japan's per capita gross national income recovered to pre-war levels. Or in other words, this was the start of what historians call the Japanese economic miracle. During this time, Japan would skyrocket to the world's third largest economy, soaring at that height through to the early 70s. Japan managed to complete its industrialization process, gaining significant improvement in living standards and witnessing a significant increase in consumption. The average monthly consumption by urban households doubled from 1955 to 1970, but what's interesting is that the consumption of daily necessities like food and clothing went down, while the consumption of recreational entertainment activities increased significantly. People were reading books and traveling and just trying to get away from it all. So Japan's economy was saved. But didn't we just say a few minutes ago that this was one of Japan's darkest times in the modern era? What replaces an entire nation's culture? Money? No, that can't be right. I live in America, and most of my audience lives in America too. Living in the richest nation on the planet doesn't equate to fulfillment or happiness. I think we can all attest to that. So it can't be money. The Japanese warrior culture was replaced by American consumerism. The fires once fueled by determination and will are now being fueled by paper money. And many people in Japan feel that emptiness. People were reading books and traveling and trying to get away from it all. These travels took them away from their work in the cities and into the countryside. People were reading books by popular authors at the time, like Dazai Osamu. As the economy skyrocketed, the need for escapism did too. But there was another rising trend in Japan at the time, one that is sadly still very relevant today. And so here is where I will say that for the next few minutes, I will be talking about suicide. So if it's something you can't listen to, please skip to the time on screen or the start of chapter 3 of this video. Okay? Alright. Suicide rates increased significantly during the economic miracle. Japan was, and still is, in the middle of a giant mental health crisis. This wasn't a single group of individuals, this was everywhere across the nation. The nation itself had this issue, and while I'm not trying to claim that the reasons talked about in this video, namely the loss of national identity and the takeover of capitalist ideals leading to a booming economy of overworked and stressed out Japanese business class, are the only reasons for the increase in suicide rates, I am willing to claim that it was a major part of it. And so to understand how the Japanese felt at the time, we can take a look at a prime cultural snapshot, Dazai Osamu's best-selling novel, No Longer Human. Dazai Osamu is one of Japan's most influential post-war writers. His writing was very influenced by his own life and the society he lived in, and it was filled with his own philosophy on life. He viewed the new capitalist society as inauthentic and hollow, and struggled to find his own place in post-war Japan. His philosophy was simple, brutal, and terrifyingly honest. If the world is fake and inauthentic, then the only authentic response is to refuse to participate in it entirely. Dazai called this terrible purity. In No Longer Human, the protagonist Yozo becomes disqualified from being human. Over the course of the novel, Yozo realizes that he's fundamentally different from other people. He doesn't understand them. He can't grasp what they want or why they act the way they do, almost like a sociopath. He does thing after thing because he thinks it's what normal people would do. He's an actor, just acting like a normal person, but every attempt at authentic connection with anyone falls short. Partway through the novel, Yozo enters a suicide pact with a woman, but only she dies. The guilt and shame, he says, disqualifies him from being human. He spirals. He becomes an alcoholic. He becomes involved in worse and worse relationships, but here's the twist. The worse his life gets, the more self-destruction he causes, the more honest he becomes about the fundamental fakeness of normal social life. And by the end of the story, Yozo has stripped away every attempt at being normal. He achieves being truly authentic and true to himself, but he's also isolated and alone. He's the only one honest about the ugliness, the compromise, the fundamental dishonesty of normal social life, and we can either pretend that consumption and climbing corporate ladders gives life meaning, or we can be brutally honest about the fact that it's all a performative, collective delusion. Yozo's journey perfectly captured what many Japanese people felt in the post-war period, that they were performing roles that didn't fit, trying to be normal in a society that had lost its authentic foundations.
According to Ishikawa, the number of submissions about No Longer Human is extremely high. Here's a graph showing his data. The number of submissions increases as Japan enters a period of rapid economic growth, then again just before the economic bubble bursts in the early 1990s, and then shoots up again recently. Ishikawa suggests that readership of No Longer Human is related to social anxiety caused by major economic changes. People today are pressured into adapting to societal demands. In a sense, we're expected to exhibit an inordinate ability to adapt. Today's high school students who are psychologically affected by this find resonance between their own feelings and those depicted in No Longer Human.
The genius and the tragedy is that Yozo becomes the most authentically human precisely by admitting that he can't be human on society's terms. He achieves this perfect self-knowledge through complete self-destruction. It's almost like death before dishonor. Maintain your integrity by burning yourself up rather than selling out. The main issue with this philosophy is that it ends in death. Dazai himself attempted suicide multiple times throughout his life, succeeding on the 4th attempt. Like so many of the characters he put on the page, he removed himself from the question of society entirely. Readers were drawn to No Longer Human because it was so uncompromisingly honest. The book sold and spread like wildfire. Finally, someone was saying something that everyone else couldn't find the words to articulate, but you can't live your life based on a suicidal philosophy. Japan needed something else. Not just someone like Dazai who could diagnose the disease, but someone who could show you how to live with it. Someone who could find a way to be truly authentic without totally destroying themselves in the process. By the end of the economic miracle, the start of finding that answer started to grow in places outside of normal society. Places where polite society didn't dare to look. Places like the settings found in Akagi. The beginning of Akagi takes place in 1958, just 3 years into the Japanese economic miracle when many Japanese people were still recovering financially. Immediately, we see the consequences of these events in the storyline of Akagi. We open with Nango, a debtor who owes millions of yen to the Yakuza after all of his money that he'd put into the stock market disappeared, playing Mahjong against those Yakuza late into the night to try and win some of his debt back. It's not going well, and Nango prays for some reversal of fortune, for someone to save him, even if they're a demon. And just at that moment, Akagi enters, soaked from the rain. Or so we think. In the next chapter, the police arrive, looking for some delinquents that were racing cars in a game of chicken. By racing as fast as they could to the edge of a seaside cliff, whoever jumps out of their car first loses. According to the police, neither car was able to hit the brakes in time and both cars went off the cliff and into the ocean. One of the kids is severely injured and in the hospital, and the other, who swam to shore, is Akagi. This is part of Fukumoto's genius. In just one chapter of backstory, we learn Akagi has no fear of death, that he lives for high-tension thrills, and that his parents are absent, presumably working long hours. This also tells us something central to Akagi's character. The other kid got hurt, and he survived without a scratch. Why? Because Akagi never hit the brake. At the bottom of the cliff are jagged rocks and exposed edges for the person who hit the brakes to fall to their death, but Akagi landed far enough away that he only landed in water. Whereas a normal person would have never played this game of chicken in the first place, a sane person would have hit the brakes long before the edge of the cliff, and even other lunatics like Akagi taking place in this game of chicken hit the brakes before the edge. But Akagi knows that there was only ever one way forward. All gas, no brakes. But even then, Akagi never gave himself the opportunity to jump out of the car, because the other car was on his driver's side, where he would die instantly if he were to jump out, so instead, he flew off the cliff at full speed. This is where we get the connection to authors like Dazai Osamu. Our protagonist is self-destructive, throwing himself into danger, places, and events that no normal person in society would, and he becomes more himself because of it. He becomes the Mahjong demon, Akagi. But on top of all this, we get even more of Akagi's demonic personality. While the police are questioning him and outright correctly labeling him as the culprit, he quietly starts swapping out Mahjong tiles from the discards into his hand, cheating his way to an enormous victory while the Yakuza are distracted. Akagi calls for the game to resume while the gangsters are still nervous about the police presence, and this leads to the head Yakuza, Ryuzaki, dealing into one of the largest hands in Mahjong. All the Yakuza obviously know that he cheated, but because of the police presence, there's nothing they can do. Akagi has successfully used this high-tension situation to his advantage, heavily turning the tables in his favor. Now, many people enjoy Akagi even without knowing how to play Mahjong.
Akagi is really good.
Akagi, I really like Akagi is basically Mahjong Kaiji.
Yeah.
And like, here's the thing. I had no interest in Mahjong. Yeah. I was watching the show. I had no rules of I had no clue of the rules of Mahjong either. Yeah, but you get drawn in, right?
But after I finished Akagi, I was like, man, maybe I should learn how to play Mahjong.
But to give you an idea of how ridiculous this hand is and blatantly obvious Akagi makes it that he's cheating here, allow me to explain what just happened. It's Mahjong lesson time, baby.
I was trying my goddamn best to learn Mahjong, and I was like...
Don't worry, I'll make it short and only relevant to what's going on here. Riichi Mahjong, the kind they play in Japan and in Akagi, is a 4-player game where you're trying to win points from your opponents by finishing a 14-tile hand with a specific win condition called a yaku. Each competitor normally starts at 25,000 points, and if any player should fall below 0 points, the game ends prematurely. The way I explain things to new players is that if you can count backwards from 5, you can play Mahjong. Your winning hand is 14 tiles long, so you need 5 blocks to have a valid winning hand. You need 4 sets of 3 tiles and a pair of 2, and then you've won. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? The 4 sets of 3 tiles can be a run of numbers, a triplet of numbers, or a triplet of special honor tiles, with the only rule being that they have to be in the same suit in order to be valid. Players take turns drawing and discarding a 14th tile every turn, discarding the tiles that are useless to them and keeping the tiles that progress their hands towards a win condition. These different win conditions give you points only if you win the hand, and the amount of points you receive from an opponent depends on how difficult it is to complete that win condition. On top of that, win conditions can stack, meaning that hands can become exponentially more valuable with combinations of rare yaku. Players of poker will recognize win conditions like having a straight or a full flush, and in Mahjong, it's entirely possible to have a full flush hand with a straight. But similar to poker, where there are some hands that are insanely lucky, like 4 of a kind, Mahjong has similar win conditions as well, and these are known as Yakuman. Yakuman are rare beyond rare. When I first started playing Mahjong, it took me 2 years to even get my first one. I play in person every Saturday and sometimes on Mondays too, but I've still never gotten one in person. In this hand, Akagi gives himself not just 1, but 2 different Yakuman, and it gets even crazier from there. The first Yakuman is called Big 3 Dragons, or Daisangen in Japanese. In Akagi's hand, we see 3 triplets on the left, each one being a triplet of the white dragon, the green dragon, and the red dragon, respectively. Collecting just one of these triplets is a win condition in and of itself, but collecting all 3 is like collecting the pieces of Exodia in Yu-Gi-Oh! The second Yakuman is that this hand has 4 concealed triplets, or suanko in Japanese. Normally, when you draw these yourself rather than steal them from your opponents in the middle of a late night showdown with the Yakuza, your opponents won't have any idea what you're up to and you're subject to the luck of the draw. What makes this hand exponentially more valuable than a ridiculous 2 Yakuman, however, is that Akagi has formed the upgraded version of suanko called suanko tanki. There are 2 ways to win a hand in Mahjong. You can either draw the 14th tile for yourself, or when you're ready to win, you can do so off of someone else's discard. The issue with 4 concealed triplets is that they have to be concealed, meaning that if you have 3 triplets and 2 pairs, winning off of someone's discard isn't concealed because you and everyone else saw that tile when it was discarded, giving you the much less valuable 3 concealed triplets. But Akagi here already has 4 concealed triplets, and all he has to do is finish his pair. The only win condition here is that the triplets have to be concealed, not his pair. So this allows him to win a huge hand like suanko by winning off of someone else's discard. This is so rare that the Yakuman upgrades to a double Yakuman, making the giant hand even bigger. Stacked with the 3 big dragons in his hand, this demonic Mahjong hand is worth a triple Yakuman, enough to end a game of Mahjong several times over. A good Mahjong player will have an average hand value of around 6,000 points. A triple Yakuman can be worth up to 144,000 points. This is the hand that Ryuzaki deals into, and it's blatant cheating, but Akagi gets away with it. This is your main character. A man, well, okay, at this point, a 13-year-old, is not fazed by the deadly potential of blatantly cheating the Yakuza out of millions or driving full speed off a cliff. This is how we meet Akagi, and he only goes on to become more and more himself, pressing the pedal to the floor and driving over the cliff over and over again in high-stakes Mahjong battles. There are a couple of arcs after this in the first several volumes of Akagi filled with high-stakes Mahjong action, but none challenge Akagi's character and show who he really is, quite like the Washizu Arc. But to talk about the arc itself, we need to learn about the villain it's named after, the infamous billionaire and serial killer Washizu Iwao. Between 1942 and 1945, Allied forces would drop 153,000 tons of bombs on Japanese cities. The burning of bamboo structures could be seen for miles after the United States performed fire bombings on cities like Tokyo and Yokohama. Standing on a hill, watching this unfold, and wishing for his country to burn to the ground, is where we meet the main villain of Akagi, Washizu Iwao. When introduced in Akagi, Washizu is 75 years old, already a billionaire who has amassed his fortune in backroom deals and shady maneuvers, but in his own spin-off manga, Enma no Touhai, we follow Washizu as a young man and his rise to power. Japan must burn. And it is Washizu who will rise like a phoenix from the ashes. After his high IQ gets him top marks at university, Washizu joins Japan's secret police, quickly rising to the rank of captain. Washizu spends his youth torturing information out of dissidents and anyone who might pose a threat to the imperial government. As a man of considerable rank and power, he does the unthinkable. He steps down from his position and leaves the secret police to become a run-of-the-mill citizen. Was it his conscience that led him to leave the police? Did he find his actions questionable? Of course not. This is Washizu that we're talking about. After the Battle of Midway, Japan's first real defeat in the Pacific, Washizu foresees Japan's loss to the Americans, sliding out the back door of the secret police before he could be questioned and executed for war crimes. After the burning of Tokyo, he declares war, not on the Americans, but on the world, to make as much money as he possibly can. And this manga gets weird. I mean, like, Washizu fighting for life and limb on a pirate ship after shooting it with a cannon level weird. I mean, like, Elvis? Running a secret political prison where he mows down inmates with a giant combine harvester modeled after Japan's first prototype robot? Kind of weird. I mean, it's weird. But if I had to pick a favorite moment before we get into Washizu's origin story proper, it's this. A guy shines Washizu's shoes for him and hypnotizes Washizu. He then challenges Washizu to a game of Mahjong where he actually wins. Screw you, Akagi. This guy beat Washizu decades ago, man. Oh God. Washizu knew what he was up to and hypnotized him first. That is the man that Washizu is. His opponents must suffer, and he must always be in control. Anyway, we're in post-war Japan, and Americans have occupied Japan. Washizu is leveraging secrets and other unmentionables that he learned about different politicians and business leaders that he learned during his time in the secret police to win deals with them. On top of this, he's working with the Americans to facilitate different business deals, including games of Mahjong where he takes people for everything they have, whether it's money, their company, or anything else they might want. The first battle of the manga depicts Washizu as a villain who is essentially unbeatable at Mahjong, but we already know that. The next battle of the manga, though, is where we get a taste of the lengths Washizu is willing to go to and just how evil, intelligent, and manipulative the man can be. Washizu faces off against Ishizaki, the leader of the Yotsubishi group. He's a dangerous and powerful man who wants to get rid of Washizu by taking over his company by beating him in a 1v1 Mahjong battle. The issue is, the battle is rigged. Washizu, knowing what he's stepping into, agrees, but only on the condition that if he wins, he gets the munitions factories owned by the Yotsubishi group. Ishizaki calls him a fool. Who would want these munitions factories after the newly established Constitution of Japan forbids Japan from waging war? What use would there be for weapons and military equipment? So Ishizaki accepts the terms and they begin playing Mahjong when Ishizaki's bodyguard, Kim, sits down to play with them, flashing his pistol. Kim was saved from the Yakuza by Ishizaki after he had won too much at a gambling den. As the game progresses, on Washizu's dealership, Ishizaki discards the Northwind. As Washizu moves to call the tile for himself, Kim wins off the tile with a great hand, and this call would have put Washizu in tenpai for 4 little wins, a Yakuman. Ishizaki, only realizing that Kim stole a win out from under him, smashes him in the face. Kim is told to know his place and go wash up from his bloody nose. Washizu follows him into the bathroom, where he tells Kim that it was a nice win, and that he's a pathetic loser to the core. Ishizaki will throw him to the wayside when it's convenient, when it serves him. Washizu will be the victor, and in order to save himself, Ishizaki will sacrifice Kim. He isn't his own man, his master controls him, and that will be his downfall. In the next round, despite being in tenpai for 13 weight 13 orphans, a double Yakuman, when Ishizaki signals Kim to deal into his middling hand with the one of characters, he plans to do so without question. Washizu, witnessing this, deals in with his own one of characters while looking Kim dead in the eye. Kim passes on his chance to win while his boss takes everything. Kim is defeated, as Washizu's words echo through his mind. As Ishizaki signals him to throw different tiles and Washizu wins off of them, he takes more abuse. Ishizaki gets fed up with him and goes outside for some fresh air. Kim starts to worry that if Ishizaki thinks he's collaborating with Washizu, he could be cast aside or worse, killed. And that's when Kim sees it. Washizu whispering in Ishizaki's ear just outside the door. As play resumes, Kim stops getting signals from Ishizaki and the tension builds. Kim is in his own head, and that's when Washizu starts laughing. Could they be working together? Could it be that Kim is going to be betrayed? Could it be that they're conspiring against him? No. If they were working together, surely Ishizaki would signal Washizu, and that hasn't... Ishizaki signals Washizu, who immediately deals in.
Kim has had enough.
Kim and the other henchmen kill each other, but Washizu remains unscathed. As Kim's life fades from his eyes, Washizu reveals what he said to Ishizaki. You have a pimple on the end of your nose. From this victory, Washizu wins the munitions factories, which the very next year would make him untold riches. As the Korean War roared to life in the 1950s, the United States government was more than happy to buy the weapons from Washizu. Making his fortune as a merchant of death for the United States, he would become the man who controlled Japan from the shadows. That is, until he meets Akagi, but for that, we'd have to wait another 20 years. And Fukumoto meant that literally. Beginning in 1997, the same year as One Piece, the Washizu Arc began. It would run until 2017. Now, I haven't read or watched One Piece, and maybe that's a future video, but when I say that One Piece went through 28 arcs before Washizu and Akagi finished their one showdown, that is literally true. From Romance Dawn all the way to Whole Cake Island, Akagi and Washizu were sitting in the same room playing Mahjong all night. To put this in perspective, this arc started before I was born. Since then, we've had the death of Princess Diana, Google got founded, Bill Clinton got impeached as a result of the world population reaches
Y2K,
Vladimir Putin, the Euro gets introduced, the international rock, YouTube gets founded, Pope John Paul, the IRA ends its military campaign, the 2000 financial Bitcoin, the BRICS economic 11 earthquake, Osama bin Laden, the Arab Xi Jinping, Grand Theft Auto 5, Snowden, water is discovered, China ends, the Panama Canal, Donald Trump gets elected, and then the Washizu Arc ends. And man, is it worth reading all those 20 years. Let's explore Mahjong's most famous arc, the Washizu Arc. We open on a man taking a drive late on a rainy night in the mountainous Japanese countryside when he spots a light coming from down a ravine. To his horror, he finds several men bearing a recently deceased man, who turns out to be Hirayama, the fake Akagi. In the previous arc, Akagi and Hirayama were meant to go face to face, but when Akagi arrives at the Yakuza mansion, there's already a match in progress. The Yakuza have hired who they think is Akagi, a man clearly gifted at Mahjong, but in a completely different way than the real Akagi. Hirayama might be a fake Akagi, but what's brilliant about Fukumoto's writing, he isn't a fraud in the normal sense. Hirayama is a genuine Mahjong savant and seems to be more of a calculator than a human. In any normal context, he'd be impressive, but that's exactly the point. He represents what passes for excellence in the real world: professional competence, reliable performance, and measurable skill, all aspects that the Yakuza clan leader is looking for in a rep player. He's looking for someone calculated, who can make moderate profits consistently, and Hirayama is just that, a player that takes probability into account when he makes his move. Ultimately, this was his downfall, with only Akagi sensing that his opponent, Urabe, was sandbagging him to up the stakes on the final game. Under the intense pressure of playing for the modern equivalent of $1.1 million in front of the Yakuza, Hirayama crumbles under the pressure, and Akagi eventually takes his place, beating Urabe in the sickest way possible, so I have to put it in this video. Urabe relaxes for a moment and deals the North Wind, a tile he was wary of cutting earlier. Akagi takes it to complete a triplet and is now waiting on one single tile. Additionally, with the call from Akagi against Urabe, it skips the person in between them, changing the draw order. Essentially, the tile the skipped person on Akagi's left was supposed to draw will now be drawn by the person to Akagi's right. This makes sure the final tile will be drawn by Urabe, and this is very significant. And actually, it's been in front of you the whole time. Me, yeah! So when you win with the last discarded tile in Mahjong, it's known as Under the River, like you scooped it up like gold during the gold rush from under the river. And in Japanese, that's called Hotei, the second half of my name here on YouTube. The first half, for those wondering, is Tenho, the Blessing of Heaven, where you win on the first possible draw in your hand as a dealer. So it's a combination of the first and last win conditions that you can possibly get in Mahjong, the idea that the channel is the beginning and the end for all things Mahjong. Anyway, Urabe realizes this is Akagi's plan and that with Hotei, the hand is big enough to take him down. The issue is that Urabe has to deal the tile himself from the 14 different tiles in his hand. And it's right now, right at the end of the night, for $1.1 million. After Hirayama was defeated, after Osamu bowed out, after coming back from a 70,000 point deficit. It's all right here, right now, and Akagi just gets up and leaves. He says it'll end here. He put a magic spell on the last tile. Urabe will be drawn to the tile that is face down before him and discard it right away. That's all there is to it. Akagi leaves. Urabe, with two pairs in his hand, has a 1 in 12 chance to deal into Akagi, assuming the tile is even in his hand in the first place. He panics. He deliberates. He uses logic to the best of his ability, but in the end, he goes with his gut. He deals the 2 of circles. Akagi isn't there, so Ishikawa, a Yakuza member, flips over the tile for him. It's a comeback. And there's a few chapters explaining how Akagi knew this would happen and how he conditioned his opponent to throw that tile, but in the end, this video will be long enough as it is. Plus, Akagi is a manga or an anime that you should experience for yourself. Akagi came to prove his superiority to the fake Akagi, and he achieved that by taking down Urabe. Hirayama can copy Akagi's looks, his mannerisms, and even some of his techniques, but he can't copy what those things represent. It's like watching someone recite a poem in a language they don't understand. Even if the words are all technically correct, you're missing out on all the emotion and the truth behind them. And the really insidious part is that people don't immediately notice. Society has become so accustomed to performance, to manufactured experience, that they are almost ready to accept this substitute. This is where Fukumoto shows his genius as a social critic. He's not just telling a story about Mahjong, he's showing exactly how authentic culture gets appropriated and commodified. He is the epitome of post-war thinking. Everything is a product, everything has market value, even authenticity itself can be manufactured and sold. But where the scheme falls apart is when real pressure gets applied. Hirayama can't handle the pressure exerted by trying to live by society's rules in this authentic space. Akagi comes back, and it's like he's never left the parlor. He radiates energy effortlessly just by existing. Both Urabe and Hirayama are defeated by their own limitations, something that Akagi points out, saying that When put in life or death situations, people react in different ways. Both Urabe and Hirayama tried running away from danger in their own ways rather than give themselves up to the risk they inherently agreed to when sitting down at the Mahjong table where everyone is an equal. Akagi even remarks, "That man will always put staying alive before living," something that Hirayama wouldn't have the chance to do. The only wound found on his body is a small needle prick where someone would place an IV, and he's been drained of almost all of his blood supply. Word gets out about the killing, and several others pop up in line with the MO, leading different Yakuza and underground affiliated people to Washizu, the creator of this vampiric Mahjong. When Yasuoka, the detective who was there on that fateful night when Akagi faced the Yakuza, hears of this, he knows there's only one man who can put a stop to this serial killer, Akagi Shigeru. Akagi, Yasuoka, and a Yakuza representative named Ogi head to Washizu's mansion where the battle will begin. On the way, however, Akagi stops by a doctor's office and after a short time returns with several energy drinks, claiming that he won't drink anything given to him by Washizu as it could be drugged. After they arrive, we finally see Washizu revealed. The rules are presented as such. It's a 6-match long battle for points 1v1 style, Akagi versus Washizu. And if a game ends where Akagi has a negative placement score, he pays that much not in money, but his own blood. Additionally, direct hits from Washizu on Akagi mean payment in blood rather than standard Mahjong points. Akagi doesn't agree to these terms. He wants more. He cuts his point total down drastically, effectively making it so that he has no buffer between losing a couple hands to Washizu and death. Akagi is doing what he always does. What he did when he sped off the cliff, when he swindled the Yakuza, when he defeated Urabe. He's luring his prey in for the kill. In addition to the blood rules, there's a significant other rule set to Washizu Mahjong. Washizu has a special set of Mahjong tiles, ones you can buy for yourself actually. For each Mahjong tile, you normally have 4 copies of it, right? Well, in Washizu Mahjong, 3 of those 4 tiles are transparent. You can see through them and you can tell what's in your opponent's hand. The 4th one is opaque like a normal Mahjong tile. The hands are drawn with a gloved hand from a covered hole in the middle of the table to avoid being able to see or feel your draws in advance. And the door indicators are drawn after the hands. These tiles lead to intense moments of tension during the arc because there will be times where your opponents could have a hand almost entirely made up of opaque tiles, and who's to say if they're really in tenpai or not. It all becomes a mind game, forcing your opponents into an internal fight against themselves. Are they being betrayed by you or themselves? The stage is set. Washizu versus Akagi. The 20-year-long night of the Mahjong demon underdog facing off against the billionaire who secretly controls Japan. The spirit of Japan versus its economic miracle. And it all began on August 31st, 1965 at 10 p.m. 60 years to the very minute this video premiered on YouTube. There's a lot of great Mahjong that happens between Washizu and Akagi during these matches. And this is where I'd like to introduce a character? There's something more than someone that infiltrates multiple works by Fukumoto, which is Zawazawa. On manga panels, you often have these sound effects written into panels to give the reader a sense of sound alongside the visuals. The most famous of these is probably the katakana go from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, meaning rumbling or menacing atmosphere. But where that sound effect shines in combat to give characters some awesome aura, Fukumoto's usage of Zawazawa is more akin to a horror movie. Zawazawa is a Japanese onomatopoeia, literally meaning when a crowd or a group of people is whispering to themselves about something bad. Where Fukumoto utilizes this sound effect is where characters feel the most tension, where someone would feel a weight in the pit of their stomach, or when someone throws themselves deep into a gamble. The more the tension builds, the more Zawazawa you tend to see on the page. And we'll see all the tension in the world with this battle of Akagi versus Washizu. Now, you might expect a battle between titans, an unstoppable force colliding with an unmovable object, a demon, and a man who considers himself a god going face to face. And while that is true to an extent, Fukumoto defies expectations. Even though Akagi is our main character, the Washizu arc primarily takes place from Washizu's perspective. He's the narrator and the point of view for most of this arc, with many people who have known Akagi through its 20-year-long arc considering Washizu as its main character. We don't witness Akagi come up from the shadows, we witness a god fall from heaven. We witness a man unravel. Washizu starts with all the confidence that you would expect him to. After all, he's killed multiple top-level Mahjong players before. Why would Akagi be any different? He wants to kill Akagi and savor every moment of it. Akagi is cocky. He's constantly smiling or not changing his expression at all when he's cornered, and it's enraging. Washizu will use his overwhelming power and luck and money to crush the insect that sits before him. Nowhere better do we see this confidence than when Washizu wants Akagi to draw the one pin. It's East 2 of the third match, and Washizu is the dealer. Thanks to a con, he has Richidora 3 locked in, and all he needs to win is the one pin to finish his pair. He's aiming for the one pin in Akagi's hand, as it will likely overflow from his other draws. Targeting overflow is a technique used by high-caliber Mahjong players. Being able to see the transparent tiles in Washizu Mahjong makes it significantly easier, but the idea remains the same. When a player has something like a 1-3 pin in their hand, drawing the 4 pin might make them drop the 1 pin because you've gone from a single tile weight to a double-sided weight. This is but a small part of overflow targeting, but it's what Washizu is aiming for here. Washizu's henchman, Suzuki, offers to deal in with his own 1 pin, but Washizu's bloodlust gets in the way. He yearns to kill Akagi. It must be Akagi who deals in. As the hand progresses though, Akagi's expression remains the same, and Washizu questions why Akagi isn't afraid of death. Shortly after, Suzuki calls a closed con on the 2 of circles, which is a miracle for Washizu. Why? It creates Kabe. Kabe, translating to wall in Japanese, is a term used in Riichi Mahjong for when we can see 4 of a tile. There's a wall of those tiles, making the tiles outside of them safe to discard. In this case, you could say that the 1 of circles is safe because Washizu can't possibly have a 2-3 of circles in his hand. There's no way for him to need a 1 of circles unless it's a pair or a triplet, which is much less likely. And since the 1 of circles in Washizu's hand is opaque, not transparent, there's nothing to give away to Akagi that that's what he's waiting on. He could very easily be waiting on a 6, 7, or 9 of characters. Once again, Washizu aims for the overflow, but his godlike luck doesn't end there. The new Dora indicator after the con is the 1-so, making his hand Richidora 6. Suddenly, a sumo or even just 1 Uradora would be enough to make a Baimon, likely killing Akagi from the blood loss. Suzuki offers to deal in again, but Washizu turns him down once more. He must be the one to kill Akagi, not some henchman. Who's to say the 1 pin wouldn't pass? On Akagi's turn, he throws the 9-mon, which could have been Washizu's winning tile, but Akagi being Akagi, of course it's not. Why doesn't Akagi flinch? Why isn't he afraid to die? Washizu will make him afraid. On his turn, to the shock of himself and everyone else in the room, he draws the final 2-so, giving himself a con. And of course, the third 1-so comes out as the Condora, the final copy of it, because we actually see the other copy in Washizu's discards. This is the luck of the god who rolls over Japan from the shadows. And the artwork here is immaculate. Fukumoto's style depicts the inner monologue of Washizu and the characters around him perfectly. You can see the warped and twisted mental state of this megalomaniac psychopath as he gleefully sees Akagi's death fast approaching. Washizu is wide-eyed, drooling at the thought of Akagi's death, the twisting line work in the background leading you back to Washizu's face with a chilling air. Washizu cackles, and Akagi is stone-faced. But as Washizu recognizes the weight of his hand that is now Richi Dora 12, a counted Yakuman that will kill Akagi, he reaches into the pit and grabs the one pin, demonic energy surging around him, twisting and turning as they metamorphosize into true hellish demons, vengeful spirits from the underworld, come to kill Akagi Shigeru. And Akagi is stone-faced. As Washizu declares himself a god incarnate, Akagi drives back the demons with his own determination, and Washizu drops the one pin. The tile that would kill Akagi Shigeru was gone. And for the first time, Akagi smiles. The tables have turned, and the counteroffensive begins. Akagi calls tiles from Yasuoka 3 times in a row, denying Washizu the ability to draw his next tile, and the billionaire begins to spiral. It looks like Akagi is on a 3-6 pin weight, but wait, that means that his one pin will overflow. He has to discard it. Washizu will win. He can run the one pin, and it comes out of Akagi's hand. And since I'll never do this part justice, I'll let Washizu's voice actor, Masane Tsukuyama, do it for me.
駆け巡る鷲津の脳内物質ベータエンドルフィン、チロシン、エンケファリン、バリン、リジン、ロイシン、イソロイシン。カチャカチャ生き残った。なかったか、鷲津岩尾。聞こえなかったか、鷲津岩尾。ロン、チュンドライキ、頭羽です。よせ！わしず様！おやめください！わしず様！わしず様
！This marks the beginning of the end for Washizu. As his fortune dwindles, the buffer he had to save himself from Akagi erodes. Washizu will have to bet his own blood against Akagi's, and as he loses more and more blood, he starts fading in and out of consciousness, barely able to discern Akagi's facial expressions. But this is the man who let Japan burn to the ground so he could rise from its ashes. The man who ascended to godhood. He would not be taken out so easily. He shall prevail, even if it means fighting to the very last hand. So let's take a look at the final hand in the battle of Washizu versus Akagi. So over what is literal months in the real world, Washizu and Akagi draw their starting hands. After coming back from the brink of death, Washizu isn't doing too hot. Washizu calls upon the gods that put him in his position of power to strike down the demon before him. Nearly collapsing from blood loss, Washizu draws his last tile, looking for tiles that get him closer to 13 orphans. 13 orphans, also known as Kokushimuso, is the hand made from the unwanted tiles in Mahjong, the honor tiles that only connect with themselves, and terminal tiles that have a hard time making sequences. Washizu's hand is so close to winning in 13 orphans as he draws his final tile that it could be called divine intervention. The tile he draws is opaque. Only Washizu and the henchmen know what he drew. Washizu has all 13 orphans plus a pair of the red dragons. The only tiles he needs is a north wind or one of bamboo, the bird. We don't know what he drew, but it's Washizu, man. I mean, it's got to be one of them. Since Akagi drew the Northwind, there's a 50-50 chance that if Akagi wants to drop the Northwind and go for a full flush in the bamboo suit, it would kill him instantly if he dealt into Washizu's Yakuman. Despite being so far ahead, dealing in directly means paying in blood that Akagi can't afford to lose because he's denied every chance to get blood back in exchange for Washizu's money. The hand begins in earnest, and Akagi is blessed with the simultaneous best and worst draw he could have hoped for, the one of bamboo. If Washizu is waiting on the one of bamboo, this could mean that Akagi is both in tenpai for a full flush, and he has 3 of Washizu's winning tiles, but it could also mean that he could deal in with the Northwind in order to reach that tenpai, that ready win state. Akagi comments that his draws can't possibly outperform the gods and demons on Washizu's side. He's just a man going against the establishment, the man that has built an impossible fortune and legacy. But it's Akagi. Of course he pushes forward. Yasuoka begs Akagi not to deal the Northwind, but he says that there's a reason why he should discard it. It's in his way. Finally, after months of keeping it under wraps, the opaque tile in Washizu's hand is revealed to be the Northwind. He's waiting on the one of bamboo, and Akagi has 3 of them. Washizu, even with all his incredible luck, even with his rise to the top and everything he's had going for him, is waiting on a single copy of a single tile, a hell weight. Akagi's hand is waiting on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 so. Any of them will let him win. And then he throws it away. He calls Khan on Yasuoka's discarded 6 of bamboo. His hand has now turned into a 2, 3, 5 weight, which means that he's given himself a chance to win before Washizu gets to draw with Rinshan Kaiho. He would not stand by and wait to be used like a sacrifice to the god Washizu. He would go down fighting, play the tiles he was given to the best of his ability. He would struggle and fight and try his hardest before dying. Or hopefully, living. But Akagi could not make it. He could not climb to the top of the mountain and get a Rinshan Kaiho. It failed. Akagi the human could not alter his fate. Washizu declares, "The phoenix will descend upon me, and I shall rise from the ashes. My Kokushi Muso hand shall be fulfilled." Yasuoka thinks it might be over for Akagi, but he's lived purely and genuinely. Yasuoka decides he must draw the 1 so himself, and he fails. He draws the 8 so. But that lets Akagi con yet again. Akagi draws an opaque tile, but doesn't win. Their efforts were useless. It's time for Washizu to take his draw. And as Washizu takes his draw, there's a flashback of everything that's happened over the course of the battle. Their first meeting, Akagi's early wins, Akagi's struggles and revelations, but in the end, you can't win against a god. Washizu draws the 1 so. The phoenix that shall guide your damned soul to the underworld has risen once again. Washizu has won. Ogi's arm is cut off, and Akagi's body is taken from the mansion. Nah, just kidding. Washizu draws the 1 so, and he prepares to give Akagi his final rites, but Akagi is stone-faced. What Washizu sees is the bird coming to life, lifting from the tile, fluttering all around him, and taking to the sky while leaving him behind. The bird circles Akagi and lands in the opaque tile he drew this past round. Washizu drew a white dragon. He's too far gone to realize it, but it's already over. His Kokushi has been denied. But not all is lost. He refuses to give up. He is Washizu. He has the gods on his side, and they shall grant him his wishes. Washizu has abandoned his 13 orphans' hand, and now he's going for big 3 dragons. The Yakuman that started it all on that fateful night in the Yakuza den. Akagi smiles. Washizu's hand can speed up immensely. He can call tiles as he pleases from Suzuki or anyone else. This is Akagi's last chance. He needs to draw the 5-so to win. The tile he draws is the 2-so. If he gets another chance to draw, he could discard his 5-so to win off the 2 or 3-so, of which there are 5 copies for him or Yasuoka to draw. Will Akagi keep the 5-so weight or go for the better 2-3-so weight? Neither! Con! A closed 4-so weight. As the chapter ends, Akagi declares, "It's not over. I can still kill you, Washizu Iwao." Now, at the moment of truth, Akagi draws the Southwind. Yasuoka drops the 2-so, which would have let Akagi win and get out of this dangerous situation had he not called Khan. But Akagi goes even further and calls Palm. Washizu is speechless. Yasuoka can make one more draw, Akagi's 5-so weight or the east wind that Washizu needs. But he can't get it. Washizu, with all his luck, with all his power, could start the path to victory right now. He has to draw. He wants to see the look on Akagi's face. Is he afraid? Is he stone-faced? Akagi smiles. Surrounded by the watchful eyes of the demons who power him, Washizu grabs the tile. He finds the east wind he desperately needs. He will win this hand. But it takes effort. His strength is fading. The blood loss is overcoming him. He moves to push his discard forward, but he finds himself pushing a large stone, a gravestone, Akagi's gravestone. Whose grave is this? The executioner's axe falls as Suzuki drops the white dragon, the first of the dragons that Washizu will call for his Daisangen, but he doesn't move. The tiles feel too heavy. He's stuck in a daze. Now is the time to draw. Akagi, draw before he can call. Do it now. Akagi doesn't smile. This game is too important to be cheap like that. Akagi will wait. But as we swap back to Washizu's perspective, the world is warping and turning and pulling him down. His vision slowly fades to black, and his hand falls. The henchmen scramble to wake him up, struggling to find a pulse, but there's nothing they can do. Washizu is dead. Akagi is the victor, but he isn't smiling. Akagi drops the glove on the table and leaves without his portion of the money. He didn't win, not really. His opponent dropped dead in front of him. In fact, Akagi is jealous. He reflects on Washizu's death. It was the moment he won. He passed away at the peak of the gamble. What a great way to die. I wonder how it'll go when it's my turn to die. Akagi is transcendent, mysterious. He operates by rules that most people can't even comprehend. He's someone who solved the authenticity crisis through sheer force of will, who found a way to live with absolute commitment to himself without destroying himself. Akagi is the perfect answer to Dazai Osamu and his characters who couldn't figure that out. This contrast between fake and real, between manufactured and authentic, seems to explain everything. It's the perfect metaphor for Japan's post-war struggle with meaning and identity. Case closed. Right? No. This analysis of authenticity versus performance, everything we've gone through, who cares? How can some fictional character be authentic? It's a great story. It's a great moral. It's what the Japanese people needed to hear after the economic miracle. We've seen that from firsthand accounts and a lot of research that was done for this video. But in the end, Akagi, the work of fiction, exists within the system that it critiques. It is sold for money. It is authenticity, teaching about authenticity even, being sold for a profit. And it'll never escape that paradox. It'll never live up to the real world. Akagi will never reach that peak. It'll never be truly authentic. As much as it pains me to say it, Akagi is stuck on the page. And this is a paradox that even Nietzsche would be stuck with when touting his Übermensch, the overman who would be able to be so honorable and manly and true and authentic that everyone else would follow in his footsteps. That too is doomed to the page in dusty old philosophy books. Had Akagi been born in the real world, really lived a life like this incredible Mahjong demon, truly inspired people to live authentically, you could prove to everyone that you could live your life true to yourself with the spirit of Japan lost after the war without destroying yourself. Only then would you be able to finally escape that paradox. And that's perfect, because Akagi is based on a real person. Sakurai Shoichi stands as the most legendary man in Mahjong history. He's the man who never lost a match in 20 years. Born in the early 1940s, this man is now in his 80s, having survived underground matches playing for and against the Yakuza. Known by the infamous name Jonki, which translates to demon, Sakurai's life reads like a novel, one filled with harrowing events and an unwavering commitment to his own unique path. One book written about him even says, quote, "From professional Mahjong players to street hustlers, there is no one in the Mahjong world who doesn't know the name of Jonki-kai chairman Sakurai Shoichi." Sakurai's outlook on life was forged in the poverty of post-war Japan. Growing up in a household where he said in an interview, poverty was the norm for most people during that era, young Sakurai learned to win with inferior equipment, taking weak spinning tops and marbles that wealthy children no longer wanted, and using his skills to win matches and take his opponent's toys. This early experience shaped his fundamental worldview. He's a person that values learning from experience over learning from books and other people. He says in an interview,
でも俺の人生はほぼ遊びから学んできたことばっかりだから。人から学ぶってことは好きじゃないね。だから人間の中で俺の師匠っていねえんだよ。
From an early age, Sakurai possessed exceptional intelligence. He completed university credits in just 3 years. Surprisingly, it was this that led him to playing Mahjong. Sakurai's introduction to Mahjong was, by his own admission, pure chance.
その時卒論のグループが4人ぐらいでどっか行こうとしたんだよ。そしたらじゃあそうだった。
People often call this story fate, he says, but from my perspective, it was really just pure coincidence. His natural talent, like Akagi, was immediately apparent. Within 6 months, his face became known in Shinjuku, and he was soon recruited for high-stakes underground games. These weren't ordinary gambling sessions, but, quote, Mahjong played in the criminal underworld. The stakes were just like those seen in Akagi, as Sakurai describes it, quote, when we say high stakes, we're not talking about levels like 10,000 yen. This was an extraordinary world where even 10 million yen could change hands. And more terrifyingly, he goes on to say, money wasn't the only thing at stake. Depending on the results, players risked losing body parts like internal organs. In the worst cases, even lives were at stake. Sakurai describes the psychological pressure with a chilling matter-of-factness, saying,
ねえ、人が刀持って入ってきちゃうとかあるわけじゃん。俺めがけて。そっちのがどっちかって言うとやべえじゃん。それは後ろから叩きつけられて、瞬間に少しだけ外して、ジャンタクの上に刃物が刺さりました。でもそれで俺は怖がるんだよね。逆にムカッとして、それから強くなっちゃってさ、負けろっていうことよ、それは。俺に。 だけど俺そういうのってちょっと卑怯なことに対するすごく許せないとこあるじゃん。だから卑怯者と思ったら俺強くなっちゃってさ、それやらない方がまだ良かったのに、やったために俺強くなったから相手やっつけちゃったっていうことありましたよ。
Sakurai operated in the dangerous world of underground mahjong, where players called Urapro or underground pros earned money through their winnings as representatives of Yakuza bosses. Even if the undefeated legend was false, one assessment notes, the mere fact that he retired with his body intact and clean hands is legendary in itself. Clean hands here, referring to the removal of fingers as punishment by the Yakuza. After a demonic career in the underground, the turning point in Sakurai's life came through a moral awakening rather than defeat. As he matured and started a family, the human cost of his success became clear.
でも自分もこの家庭持ったり父親だったりいろいろなってくと、いや俺がやっつけたやつの中もう家庭があるんだよなと思っちゃうじゃないですか。
This realization led to his retirement from underground mahjong in 1983. His retirement was so complete that when he attempted to return to regular mahjong parlors, he experienced what can only be described as spiritual rejection.
それで久しぶりに雀荘行ってみたんで、パイが触るなって怒るんですよ、俺に。
After his spiritual reconciliation with mahjong, Sakurai emerged as a teacher rather than a competitor. In 1988, he opened Pai no Oto, or the Sound of Tiles, a mahjong parlor and dojo dedicated to teaching his unique style of play, a group of techniques called Jonki Ryu, or in other words, mahjong demon style. Despite Sakurai's unrivaled success and mountain of victories, Jonki Ryu wasn't designed for winning, but spiritual development. The style includes unique constraints like playing tiles within the first 2 seconds of your draw, never discarding honor tiles on the first turn, and various other restrictions designed to develop character rather than skill. Sakurai's influence extended beyond his dojo through the famous Saikoi-sen tournament, which would later form into the Saikoi-sen professional organization. When invited to participate in the first tournament in 1989, Sakurai declined but sent manga artist Katayama Masayuki as his representative. Like we see in Akagi, where he sends Osamu to fight against Urabe, Katayama was shockingly victorious against professional players, creating a dynamic of Jonki Ryu versus the more traditional professional style. Now in his 80s, Sakurai has largely withdrawn from public mahjong, focusing on simple pleasures. Being the tough guy that he is, he still gets questions like if he's afraid of anything, to which he replies,
うちの奥さんだけだ。怖いったらうちの奥さん。ある意味だよ。
Ironic, coming from the man who once had Yakuza holding knives to his back. Sakurai's impact on mahjong extends far beyond his underground victories or teaching. He represents a bridge between the dangerous, authentic world of high-stakes gambling and the sanitized, commercialized version that exists today. His students continue to succeed in professional mahjong, carrying forward his influence even as the man himself retreats from public life. His critique of modern mahjong culture remains relevant. The tension between authentic competition and commercial entertainment, between traditional values and modern efficiency, between spiritual development and material success. In refusing to compromise his principles for mainstream acceptance, Sakurai embodies a kind of integrity rare in any field. Sakurai's Shoichi remains impossible to categorize, too complex to be reduced to legend or myth. His legacy isn't just in the games that he won or the students that he taught, but in his demonstration that it's possible to walk an entirely original path through life, even if that path leads through some very dark places. At my age, I end up doing things that people probably think he shouldn't be doing that at his age, he says in an interview from this year. I don't think there are people like me around. In this, and in so much else, Sakurai Shoichi is almost certainly correct, perfectly mirroring a moment that Akagi shares with Nango. But wait, if he's still alive, then whose grave is that? 58 stops south of Tokyo on the Keikyu Line is Shiori Station in Yokosuka, Japan. Located in Kanagawa Prefecture, there are 100 reasons to visit Yokosuka. Some of those might stem from the horrors of war. They might stem from the pacification of Japan, from the occupation of Japan by the US. You might be going there to see the famous naval base, which has been owned and occupied by the US since the war. You might be going there for Sukajan jackets based on traditional Japanese clothing, but made to fit the tastes of naval officers stationed in your hometown. Maybe you're there to visit a grave. What's interesting about Akagi and Fukumoto's interpretation of society through it as a work of fiction is that Akagi never actually succumbs to a meaningless death in gambling. Far later in life, and not in his own manga, but in 10, where he originally appeared, 9 years after Akagi's big tournament appearance, Akagi suffers from early onset Alzheimer's disease. He passed away peacefully on September 26, 1999, at the age of 53. In the manga, and now in real life, his tombstone was built in his honor, where many of his fans have brought him offerings. In real life, it's traveled to a variety of locations, including a famous Mahjong museum, but now rests in a bar in Yokosuka. This grave, the one in real life, attracts all sorts of people. This isn't just a fandom, this is a spiritual crisis made visible. When Sakurai says Mahjong has belatedly entered that industrial world, he is describing the final colonization of an authentic space by market forces. The last arena where genuine stakes could be encountered is being transformed and packaged as an entertainment product. This raises an uncomfortable question that post-war Japanese society, and really any modern capitalist society, has to face. Do we need dangerous spaces like the ones found in Akagi and Sakurai's lives? Do we need these dangerous spaces? No. The Japanese economic miracle replaced warrior culture with consumer culture, a divine emperor with corporate hierarchy, Bushido samurai with salarymen. But what it couldn't replace was the human need for genuine meaning, for authentic connection, and for the kind of truth that you can only find under real pressure and competition. Competition like you find at a Mahjong table. I have met dozens of people, both in playing Mahjong and just gaming in general, that I would have never associated with had it not been for these virtual, fictional, and constructed spaces. I have good friends, great friends even, that I would have never met. Because no matter if you're the oldest person in the room, or the youngest, or the richest, or the poorest, no matter how you identify, no matter what great social circles you run in, or how high your tax bracket is, none of that matters. When you sit down at a Mahjong table, you are a Mahjong player. That is the centralizing truth. You don't have this group fighting that group, or these people hating those people. You just have a space where we can finally all be human. And in a climate where our vitriol and hatred towards each other is commercialized and commodified, having a space to sit down and play Mahjong and just be a Mahjong player doesn't just shield us from the identity conflict that they want to profit from, it brings us all together as a community, as a bunch of people who might have never met. Akagi proves what post-war capitalist societies couldn't. Authentic living and connection is possible through competition or the things that we love, even if those things don't include Mahjong tiles or manga panels. The grave proves that some things remain unsellable, even in a world where everything is for sale, and sometimes that's exactly what the world needs most.